Hello everyone and welcome to Stefan's podcast, the podcast for everything Japanese news and what's going on in my little island. Hope you're having an absolutely fantastic day, and let's jump into the news stories around the world. Now, if you've watched this show before, you know how much I hate the price of fruit in Japan. The price of fruit in Japan is ludicrously expensive. I hate it so much I barely eat any fruit anymore. It's so sad. But this is how expensive it is. A premium cherry has just sold for 100,000 yen, and that is just one single cherry. One single cherry has sold for around $600 or £500 for one cherry. Who in their right mind buys one single cherry? Now, I bet you're wondering, how big is this cherry? Well, this cherry has a diameter of 34 to 37 millimeters, so not even centimeters, so it's not even that big. It's about that. That's not exciting. Who buys a cherry for that much? So this was sold off, and apparently this special magical cherry was the number one cherry in all of Yamagata Prefecture. So very good job to the person who sold that. I wish I was a farmer and can sell a single cherry for 100,000 yen. You sell two of those, that's your month done. You can go on holiday and relax. Oh, crazy stuff. To be honest, I'm surprised my supermarket doesn't do this, because the price for pineapple, 900 yen for a pineapple. One pineapple, you kidding me, bro? Are you kidding me? It's ridiculous. But the next news story going on around in the world is sticking with fruit and food and what's going on all around that. So, vegetables are being turned into crayons for children. In Japan, if there are some deformed vegetables, so they don't look very good, but they taste fine, but they aren't good enough to be sold, a magical farmer has decided to turn his wastage into crayons. He bought this magical machine that dries the fruit out, turns it into a powder, and then you can turn them into crayons. I have to say, the crayons, I think, are on the little bit of the expensive side. I will say I haven't bought crayons in a long time, but I assume you can get them in the 100 yen store for like 100, 200 yen, right? So these crayons, for 10 of these magical crayons, they are being sold for 2,200 yen. That is including tax, by the way, so good job for you. These are premium special crayons made from vegetables. They're safe for children to have, because if they put it in their mouths, they can eat it. Num, 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 num. I will say at 2,000 yen, I think I'd much rather just go and get my child a carrot to eat than crayons, because that is pretty expensive. But they're hoping these sort of things are going to save food wastage. This is the whole design for it, to save food wastage, so we don't have these good carrots just supposedly going to waste. Personally, I think I'd rather just eat the deformed carrots. I don't care what a carrot looks like, as long as it tastes good, that's a-okay for me. But I know what you're thinking. Is there any other fruits or vegetables that can be turned into magical crayons? Well, the answer for you is yes. For each individual color of crayon, they need to use different fruit. So for orange, we have carrot. For green, we have spinach. For light brown, we have burdock. I've never seen burdock before. And they are apparently all grown in Saitama Prefecture, and they have all these different vegetables that they can use to turn into these beautiful crayons. Especially Chinese cabbages are a particular one for these things. The machine heats the vegetables to over 300 centigrades, that is very hot, and then turns it into a powder, like I said before. So cool stuff, Japan. You're doing good stuff on the waste. I will say, I can't see this being a big hit at 2,200 yen for crayons, but who knows? I haven't bought crayons since I was about 5, so maybe this is the going price. I have seen crayons in the UK once for about £10 in some shops, so could be a thing. We shall see in the future. Next news story coming up for you is the Osaka Expo is going to be a giant expo next year. All different countries from around the world are coming to come up with different designs, how they want their cities, environmental things. It's a giant expo that's coming in Japan next year, and if you're coming to Japan next year, I would look when the expo is and try and avoid that if you're just coming for a vacation, because hotels are going to be expensive, flights are going to be expensive. It's going to be a very, very big time. But a country has just pulled out of it. Argentina is now the third country to say that they aren't going to attend this giant expo. The other two countries that said they're not going to come because of costs are Mexico and Russia. So initially 60 countries planned on building their own pavilions, which by the way, in an expo, these pavilions are ridiculously expensive. If anyone's ever been to the NAC, it's going to be prices like that. But the number has now decreased to 51 with Argentina coming out. But a total of 161 countries and religions and 9 organizations are scheduled to participate in the expo. It's going to be huge, probably the biggest expo of the year. So get ready for that if you live in Osaka. That is going to be a very, very, very busy time for you. The next news story for you, coming into the next one, we have, oh yes, Japan at the moment is dealing with about 25 million tourists a year. That's how many they had last year. And this year is looking to get pretty close to that number, if not exceeding it. But there are now a lot of teething problems if you've been following this podcast or you've been listening to the news. We had here on my island, a temple just banned tourists because they can't behave, or specifically Korean ones. We have in Yamanashi, they're putting up photo barriers so people can't take pictures of Mount Fuji and a convenience store for some strange reason. And also we're having places looking at charging 4 or 5 times more for visiting a castle, which is ridiculous. But Japan say that they want to increase tourism numbers to 60 million a year. So that's double what we have now. I will say that sounds like a little bit of a nightmare. I can't see it particularly happening. Not the way that Japan is working at the moment, because they seem to have a bit of a love-hate relationship with tourists, as does everywhere in the world. UK, America, you name it. Everyone loves the tourists, but they don't want them to stay in their town because they bring a lot of problems. They certainly do. So how are Japan going to do 60 million people? A lot is going to have to change. A lot of public transport is going to have to change in big cities where there's big tourist attractions. I know Kyoto are currently looking at getting more buses and services around popular destinations, and Tokyo is going to have to do some changes. So what would be the problems? I think a lot of people in Japan are not going to like this because they already don't like the tourists as it is. Just look at the shrine that already banned tourists. There's going to be huge problems, and it seems like this is the government tourist board saying, yes, we want to bring 60 million people in, but everyone else is going, oh, I don't know if we want that number. And I recently visited Osaka for New Year, that very popular street where there's a giant Don Quixote there. That place is my version of hell. Just tourists everywhere, ridiculous on New Year's. I absolutely did not like that center strip of Osaka, although the rest of Osaka is very nice. And I've heard that Kyoto at times can also be like this, just tourists everywhere, and it's not enjoyable. The nice thing about Japan is when there's not too many tourists around and you get to see it all by yourself. I have been spoilt for the time that I have been there, because the first time I visited Japan was just as COVID was happening. So I visited in March 2020, so literally the start. So all the other tourists had left. Me and my family were the last tourists to see Tokyo, and we got to do all these things without any other tourists in the area, and just in general there weren't many people around. So we were very lucky. When I first moved out here as well, COVID was just sort of starting to lift, and I could stay in places like Fukuoka for very cheap compared to now, and I could also go to Nagasaki for reasonably priced. But now the prices are creeping up and up with the tourists, especially Fukuoka. Fukuoka has got ridiculously expensive. When I first came here, I stayed in Fukuoka for 3 nights for 20,000 yen. Now I'm struggling on the weekend to find ones under 30, 40, 50,000 yen. It's got ridiculously expensive, and the hotel that I stayed in was probably the nicest one of the nicest ones that I've stayed in Japan. Very nice. Cannot get that now, just absolutely not. Too many tourists. Very sad and very annoying. But that leads to our next news story for you. Oh yes, Oh, English! The old English textbook, the old Nihongo textbook that I use. Well, not this one specifically, but a junior high school English textbook has had to remove someone from the textbook. And you're probably wondering, oh, what did this person do? Well, it's Otani Shohei's translator. He was set to be in the textbook as someone who uses English as a good job, as a good career. They are now having to remove him, and they are changing him in place for the football translator instead. It's for the Japanese soccer team. So very, very nice to see that go. It's very sad and kind of crazy that that story had to go on with Otani Shohei's translator. Absolute madness. The annoying thing, I was trying to work out what textbook this was, but it doesn't really say, and every single news story of this, and there's been 4 or 5 of them in the Japanese news, NHK, just all these different news stories. Almost every single one is a copy and paste of the exact same article. Very annoying. I think the book was called One World, but I can't be 100% sure on that, and it's really difficult to find the name of this book. I don't use One World, and I will say I haven't heard of One World before this, but it could be the name of the textbook, but I just cannot find the name of it. Very, very frustrating. But he's been removed, he's out, and the translator for the Japanese football team is. So good. Study English, everyone. Study English, and then you can make lots of money translating for sports. And don't gamble on them. Don't gamble on them. Gambling is bad. Don't do it, or don't get caught. Don't get caught. Okay, next news story for you is our final one of the day. It certainly is. Oh, Japan is going to make it easier for people to live here. Well, for certain type of people. If you're a foreign trainee in a care centre, they are trying to make it easier for care centres to hire you. So before, the company had to be going for at least 3 years before, and they had to meet a load of different requirements. They are now lowering that for you if you want to come and work in Japan in the care sector. They're lowering it by removing that 3-year minimum, and now just setting a sort of requirement list that they need to meet if you don't hit that 3-year requirements. So it's a lot easier now for companies to hire you, hopefully. And that they're looking at making it easier so that you can get a job and then start changing jobs within your sector. So that'd be very, very good, especially here for me. If they did that with English teachers, it would be a lot easier if you could swap and change jobs. From my understanding, for an English teacher, it's relatively easy once you get a new job to apply for a new visa, but for other professions it can be very, very difficult. And the Japan immigration system is full of bureaucracy and very, very difficult. So good luck to anyone who is going through it. I know patience is going to be needed, and you can do it. And hopefully come and live in Japan, because Japan is very good to live for the most part. There are, like everywhere, some good things and some bad things. But that is all the stories for you today, or at least all the news ones that we got coming up. This weekend, I just ran a half marathon and tanked through that. I will say I maybe almost gave myself hypothermia after it, but I did complete the half marathon. My time wasn't particularly quick. It was 2 hours and 20 minutes. The really tough thing about doing a half marathon in Toshima is the hills. It's so mountainous that I was trying to, in my head, set a plan for how to run this half marathon, and my goal was to, every 4 kilometers, have a little rest, and that kind of worked out in line with the hills. So that was working absolutely perfect for me. I'd get to 4 kilometers, I'd be sort of near the top of a hill, walk the rest, and then I'd get a nice little run down the hill. Very, very good. But the last 3 or 4 kilometers, my legs just weren't working anymore. I hit that wall and slowed down. So my times for the first hour was an hour for 10 kilometers. And then for the next 10 kilometers, it was like an hour and 10 minutes, and then the last kilometer and a bit, it was 10 minutes. So a little slow on that. So we can work on improved. But after I finished the half marathon, I decided to have a cold bath to get rid of all the aches in my body. I get out of the bath, after being in it for 10-15 minutes, and I'm on the phone to my sister and I look at my hands and I can't feel them anymore and I'm shaking. My hands were blue, my hands were white, my fingernails were blue, and then I was like, oh, I need to like really warm up, this isn't good. I then get in a hot bath. It takes me 40 minutes of like reheating the bath constantly to actually feel that the bath's warm and for my fingers to go back to normal. So if you're gonna have a cold bath after doing some athletics, be careful, be careful. I also could have been very dehydrated because I didn't drink anything while on the run. And funny story, so I had a 1,000 yen note in my bag, or in my phone case. There's only one, not even a convenience store, like a shop on the route. And I thought to myself, towards the end, I'm gonna buy myself a Pocari Sweat or I'm gonna buy myself a water. I run for 20 off the 21 kilometers and I think, you know what, I'm gonna get myself a drink from the vending machine. So I go and get my note out, I go up to the old vending machine. The note that I have has gotten wet, so the vending machine just kept poking the money out. So I couldn't even get a drink. I was just sitting there after 20 kilometers of running, just going, yeah, this is brilliant. Of course this would happen to me. So I then run home, have some water and have a lovely time. But that is the end of the podcast for you. Have an absolutely fantastic rest of your week. I will be back again on Friday and I will have some myths coming up for you in the shorts. So have a fantastic week and I will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.